I was born in the breath of a sun god, raised where the jasmine blooms at midnight and the gold never stops weeping from the sky. But as I stood at the iron gates of Valtharion, the air didn't just turn cold, it died. My brother's sins were a debt written in blood, and I was the coin used to pay it. They told me I was going to a king. They didn't tell me I was being fed to a monster who wore a crown of ice. The kingdom of Valkorath thrives on warmth. We are a people of light, of vineyards, and of open skies, but light casts the longest shadows, and my brother, Crown Prince Hartman, stepped into the darkest one. His betrayal of the Valtharion Treaty wasn't just a political blunder. It was an act of war against a man who had forgotten how to bleed. Valtharion is not just a kingdom, it is a tomb of permafrost. Rumors drifted south like ash, stories of a king, Keenan Paul, whose soul was tethered to the moon. They called him the Cursed King, a man who became a beast when the sky turned white. To prevent a massacre, my father gave them me. I was the forgotten princess, the spare heir, the lamb sent to the wolf. Now I am the only warmth in a world of ice. And I am starting to realize that the king doesn't just want my silence, he needs my soul to keep the beast at bay. The carriage wheels didn't roll, they shrieked. The iron-rimmed wood groaned against the frozen road, a sound like teeth grinding in the dark. I pressed my palms against the velvet seats, but the cold bled through my silk gloves, numbing my fingertips until they felt like lead. Outside the frosted window, the world had died. The vibrant greens of Valkorath had been replaced by the skeletal, silver-gray reaches of the Pine Barrens. The trees here didn't sway. They stood like jagged spears aimed at a sky the color of a bruised lung. "We are crossing the threshold, princess," a voice rasped. I looked at Sir Kale, the knight my father had sent to escort me, or rather, to ensure I didn't jump from the moving carriage. He looked terrified. His hand hovered near the hilt of his sword, his eyes darting toward the tree line. "What are you looking for?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, fragile as spun glass. "Movement," he whispered. "They say the king's guard aren't men. Not entirely. They say they sent fear from miles away." I pulled my fur cloak tighter. It was a gift from my mother, lined with the golden wool of our southern sheep. It felt like a mockery here. "I am the daughter of the sun. I will not give them the satisfaction of smelling my fear." It was a lie. My heart was a bird trapped in a cage of ribs, fluttering so hard it hurt. The carriage lurched to a halt. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. It was a thick, suffocating quiet that suggested something was watching, waiting for us to breathe. I waited for the door to open, but it didn't. Instead, a low, vibrating growl rolled through the floorboards. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't even a wolf. It was the sound of the earth itself cracking open. The door was ripped outward. I didn't scream, I froze. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had been carved from the mountain itself. He was towering, draped in furs so dark they swallowed the moonlight. His hair was black, messy, and dusted with frost. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They weren't brown or blue. They were the color of molten gold, burning with a hunger that felt ancient. "Lori of Valkorath," he said. His voice wasn't a voice. It was a tectonic shift. It vibrated in my very marrow. "I am," I managed to say, tilting my chin up despite the way my knees shook. "And you are the Gaoler, I presume?" The corner of his mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. It was a snarl suppressed. He stepped back, gesturing to the wasteland of ice beyond the carriage. "I am Keenan," he said. "And you are a week early for the full moon. You should thank your gods for that." He reached out a hand to help me down. His skin was bare, exposed to the sub-zero air, yet steam rolled off him as if he were a furnace. As my gloved hand touched his palm, a jolt of heat, pure, agonizing, electric heat snapped between us. Keenan flinched. He pulled his hand back as if I had burned him, his golden eyes widening. For a split second, the predator mask slipped, and I saw something else. Agony. "The scent," he muttered, almost to himself. He leaned in, his nose brushing the pulse point of my neck. I felt his breath, hot, smelling of pine and copper. "The sun. You carry the sun in your blood." "Get away from her," Kale shouted, finally finding his courage. He drew his steel. Keenan didn't even look at him. With a movement so fast it was a blur, he backhanded the air. He didn't even touch the knight, but a gust of pressurized wind sent Kale flying back into the depths of the carriage, unconscious before he hit the seat. "Don't," I gasped, reaching for Keenan's arm. "He's just a servant." Keenan turned back to me, his pupils blown wide, nearly eclipsing the gold. He looked at my hand on his furs, then up at my face. The air around us seemed to thicken, the snowflakes slowing down as if the world were holding its breath. "You are the sacrifice," he whispered, his voice dropping to a predatory purr. "And I have been hungry for a very long time." He didn't lead me to a palace. He led me to a fortress of black stone and jagged ice that rose out of the tundra like a broken tooth. This was the glass citadel, my new home, my beautiful frozen cage. As the massive iron doors groaned shut behind us, locking out the dying sun, I realized one thing with terrifying clarity. The stories were wrong. The king didn't just turn into a wolf on the full moon. The wolf was already here, standing right in front of me, and he was fighting the urge to tear the world apart just to stay warm. The iron doors of the glass citadel didn't just close. They sealed with a subterranean thud that vibrated through the soles of my boots. The sound was final. It was the sound of a coffin lid snapping shut on the girl I used to be. Keenan didn't look back at the carriage or the unconscious knight. He simply walked, his heavy fur cloak sweeping against the black marble floors like a dying wing. I had no choice but to follow. If I stayed by the gates, I would freeze. If I ran, I would be hunted. In Valtharion, the king was the only sun, and his light was cold. The entrance hall was a cathedral of ice. Massive pillars of translucent blue quartz stretched upward, disappearing into a vaulted ceiling draped in frost-heavy tapestries. There were no torches here. Instead, globes of soft bioluminescent moss hung in silver cages, casting a sickly, ethereal glow over everything. It made the shadows long and hungry. "This way," Keenan said. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew I was there, stumbling in his wake, my lungs burning as they tried to process air that felt like inhaled needles. "Is there no fire in this kingdom?" I managed to gasp, my breath blooming in a thick white cloud. Keenan stopped. He turned slowly, his silhouette cutting a jagged hole in the dim light. "Fire is a luxury for the weak, princess. In Valtharion, we embrace the chill. It keeps the mind sharp. It keeps the blood from boiling." "My blood is already freezing," I snapped, my southern temper finally sparking through the terror. "If you brought me here to be a diplomatic bridge, it would be wise to ensure I don't turn into a statue before morning." He stepped toward me. The heat radiating from his body was startling, a physical wall of warmth that defied the environment. He stopped just inches away, looming over me. Up close, his face was a landscape of harsh angles and hidden pain. There was a faint scar running from his temple to his jaw, a silver line that looked like a lightning bolt frozen in time. "You are not a bridge, Lori," he whispered, his golden eyes scanning my face with a terrifying intensity. "You are a debt, and debts are kept in the dark." He reached out, his gloved fingers grazing the side of my hood. I flinched, but he didn't pull away. He simply adjusted the fur, his touch surprisingly steady. For a moment, the predatory tension in his shoulders ebbed, replaced by a flicker of something that looked like recognition. Or perhaps hunger. It was hard to tell the difference when looking at a wolf. "Your quarters are in the west wing," he continued, his voice returning to its granite rasp. "Do not wander after sunset. The citadel has moods, and my guards do not recognize faces in the dark. They only recognize scents." "And what do I smell like to them?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Keenan leaned down, his lips ghosting past my ear. I felt the vibration of his words in my skull, like a summer afternoon that hasn't realized the sun has set. "To them, you smell like a feast." He pulled away abruptly and gestured to a stone staircase that spiraled upward into the gloom. "Go. A servant will bring you something to eat. Do not leave your room until I send for you." I watched him walk away, his gait effortless and silent, despite his size. He disappeared into a corridor lined with statues of weeping wolves, leaving me alone in the freezing silence of the hall. The servant arrived 20 minutes after I reached my room, a chamber of gray stone and white furs that felt more like a cave than a bedroom. She was a hollow-cheeked woman named Ilara, whose skin was so pale it was almost blue. She set a tray of black bread and salted meat on a table and bowed low, her eyes never leaving the floor. "Is the king always like that?" I asked, my voice echoing in the sparse room. Ilara shivered. "The king is a man of many burdens, Highness. The curse. It is heavy tonight. The moon is waxing." "The curse," I repeated, the word tasting like copper. "They say he changes." Alara finally looked up, and for a second I saw raw, unadulterated pity in her eyes. "He doesn't just change, Princess, he breaks, and everything around him breaks too." She hurried out before I could ask more, the heavy oak door clicking shut. I didn't eat. I couldn't. Instead, I paced the length of the room, my silk slippers silent on the furs. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I thought of Hartman, probably drinking spiced wine in the golden halls of Valkarath, oblivious to the frost creeping into my bones. Sleep was impossible. Every groan of the castle, every gust of wind that whistled through the masonry, sounded like a howl. By midnight, the silence became its own kind of torture. I needed to move. I needed to see where I was. I grabbed a small lantern from the bedside, its pale light flickering, and eased my door open. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows. I moved toward the center of the wing, guided by a strange low hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It wasn't a sound, it was a pull, like a magnet tugging at the iron in my blood. I found myself at the entrance of a vast circular room. It wasn't a bedroom or a throne room, it was a library, but it wasn't filled with paper. Thousands of tablets of translucent ice stood on shelves carved directly into the rock. Thousands of years of history etched into frozen glass. In the center of the room stood a massive basin of dark, liquid silver that didn't reflect the light, it swallowed it. And there, standing by the basin, was Keenan. He was shirtless, his back to me. His skin was a map of scars, claw marks, bite wounds, and strange, glowing runes that seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic amber light. He was hunched over, his muscles corded and twitching, his hands gripping the edge of the basin so hard the stone was cracking. "I told you," he growled, his voice distorted, more animal than man, "not to wander." I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt back to my room and bar the door. But I couldn't move. The air in the library was different. It wasn't just cold. It was charged, like the atmosphere before a lightning strike. "You're hurting," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He turned, and I stumbled back. His face was contorting, his jaw lengthening, his brow furrowing into something savage. His teeth were lengthening into points, and his eyes, the gold had turned into a searing, blinding white. "Leave," he choked out, a string of saliva trailing from his lip. "Before I forget that you are a princess. Before I forget that I am a man." Instead of leaving, I took a step forward. I didn't know why. It was madness. But as I drew closer, the amber runes on his back glowed brighter, and the crushing cold of the room began to lift. The closer I got to him, the warmer the air became. It was as if my very presence was a dampener on the frost. "Keenan," I said, reaching out a hand. He lunged. He didn't hit me. He slammed his hands into the wall on either side of my head, pinning me against the frozen stone. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his chest, smell the wild metallic scent of the beast rising within him. He put his forehead against mine, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. "Where are you?" he hissed, his eyes searching mine. "The moment you entered the gates, the howling in my blood, it went quiet. Why does the beast fall silent when you are near?" I looked up into the face of the monster, and for the first time, I wasn't just afraid. I was curious. Maybe because I'm the only thing in this kingdom that isn't afraid to burn. He let out a low, pained groan and pressed his face into the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply. He didn't bite, he didn't tear. He just held me there, trembling, as the ice on the walls began to melt, dripping like tears onto the floor. For the first time in an eternity, the king of Valtharion was still. And I realized, with a sinking dread, that I wasn't just his prisoner, I was his cure. And in this world, people never let go of the things that stop their pain. The silence that followed Keenan's admission was heavier than the blizzard outside. He stayed there, his forehead pressed against the junction of my neck and shoulder, his ragged breathing eventually smoothing into a rhythmic, heavy thrum. I could feel the heat of his skin through the thin silk of my nightgown, a furnace blast that should have been comforting but felt like standing too close to a forest fire. Slowly, his grip on the wall loosened. He didn't pull away immediately. He lingered, his nose brushing against my collarbone in a way that was disturbingly intimate for a man who had been ready to tear my throat out seconds ago. When he finally stepped back, The gold had returned to his eyes, though they were bloodshot and weary. He looked at me, truly looked at me, as if seeing a ghost. "You should be dead," he rasped, his voice regaining its human grit. "Any other human who gets that close to me when the moon is climbing, they end up in the permafrost." "I am not any other human," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I adjusted my cloak, trying to reclaim some shred of the dignity I'd lost while pinned to a wall. "I told you. I am of Valkorath. My blood has been seasoned by the sun for 1,000 generations." Keenan looked down at his hands. The claws had receded, leaving only blunt, scarred knuckles. He turned away from me, moving back toward the silver basin. "It's more than that. Your scent, it doesn't just mask the beast, it numbs it. I haven't felt this quiet inside my own head since I was a boy." He reached into the dark liquid of the basin and pulled out a jagged shard of black glass. "Go back to your room, Lori. Now, before I decide that I like the silence too much to let you leave this library." I didn't move. "What is that?" I asked, gesturing to the basin. "The servant Ilara said you break things. Is that what you're doing? Breaking the history of your people?" He turned the shard over in his hand. "These are the memory tablets. In Valtherian, we do not write on parchment. Paper rots, paper burns. But ice remembers everything if you know how to speak to it. I was looking for a way to stop what's coming. The great frost, it's deepening every year, and my curse is the anchor keeping it here." "If you lift the curse, the winter ends?" I asked, a spark of hope lighting in my chest. If the winter ended, perhaps I could go home. Perhaps my sacrifice wouldn't be a life sentence. Keenan let out a short, bitter laugh. "If I lift the curse, I die. The wolf and the man are two sides of a rusted coin, princess. You can't melt one without destroying the other." The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. To save his kingdom, he had to cease to exist. To save myself, I had to watch him disappear. "Get out," he said, his voice cold again, the wall of the king sliding back into place. "And Lori? Lock your door, from the inside." I didn't need to be told twice. I retreated into the dark hallways, my lantern flickering low, but as I walked, I realized the hum in the walls hadn't stopped. It was louder now, a thrumming vibration that seemed to be coming from the very floor beneath my feet. I didn't go back to my room. Call it the recklessness of the sunborn, or perhaps the desperation of a girl who had already lost everything. But I followed the vibration. It led me past the west wing, down a narrow servant's staircase, and into the bowels of the citadel. Here, the air didn't just smell like ice, it smelled like old blood and wet fur. I reached a heavy iron grate set into the floor. Peering through the bars, I saw a cavernous room below. It was filled with men, or what looked like men. They were the king's guard, the ones Kale had been so afraid of. They were stripped to the waist, their bodies covered in the same glowing amber runes I had seen on Keenan's back. But they weren't reading tablets, they were fighting. It wasn't a sparring match, it was a riot of teeth and bone. They moved with a predatory grace that no human could mimic, leaping across the room, their shadows on the walls stretching into lupine shapes. In the center of the fray stood a man with white hair and eyes like chips of flint. He wasn't fighting, he was watching. "The king is weak tonight," the white-haired man said, his voice carrying up through the grate. "The girl from the south, she's a poison. She's making his blood go soft." "She's a sacrifice, Commander Nixon," one of the guards panted, his chest heaving. "The treaty says." "The treaty is a leash," Nixon roared, and the room went silent. "Keenan thinks he can play at being a man while a wolf sleeps in his chest, but the moon doesn't bargain. If he won't lead us to the sun, we will find someone who will." My heart stopped. This wasn't just a kingdom of ice, it was a kingdom on the brink of a coup. Keenan wasn't just fighting his own nature, he was fighting a court of monsters who wanted him to embrace it. I backed away from the grate, my breath coming in short, jagged gasps. I needed to get back. I needed to. A hand clamped over my mouth. I was yanked backward into a dark alcove, the lantern slipping from my fingers and shattering on the stone. The light died instantly. I struggled, my elbows catching on a hard fur-covered chest, but the grip was like iron. "I told you," a familiar, gravelly voice whispered into my ear, "not to wander." Keenan. He didn't let me go. He held me against him, his heart thudding violently against my back. He was shaking, not from cold, but from a terrifying, repressed rage. You heard them, he breathed, his lips brushing my hair. You heard what they want. They want to kill you, I whispered through his fingers. No, he said, and I could hear the grim smile in his voice. They want to let the wolf out. They want me to lead an army into Valkarath and turn your golden fields into a graveyard of ice. They think that if they spill enough southern blood, the curse will be satisfied. He turned me around in the darkness. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his eyes, those burning, molten pools of gold. My people are starving, Lori. The ice is winning. And now they see you. They see the warmth you bring me, and they see it as a weakness. You aren't just a prisoner anymore. You're a target. What do we do? I asked. The "we" slipped out before I could stop it. Keenan reached out, his hand cupping my jaw. His thumb traced the line of my lower lip, a gesture that felt like both a promise and a threat. We play the game, he said. Tomorrow, there is a feast to celebrate the union of our kingdoms. You will sit by my side. You will wear the furs of a queen of Valtharion, and you will pretend that you love the monster you've been sold to. And if I can't, then Nixon will realize that you are the only thing keeping me human. Keenan leaned in, his voice a ghost of a sound. And he will kill you just to see me turn. I looked into the darkness of the hall, thinking of the warm sun of Valkarath, now 1,000,000 miles away. I was a princess of light, trapped in a den of wolves, and my only hope for survival was the man who wanted to eat my soul. Fine, I said, my voice hardening, but if I'm to be your queen, Keenan, you'd better start acting like a king. He let out a low, dark chuckle that sent shivers down my spine. Careful, little son. If I act like a king, I might start believing I deserve to keep you. He let go of me then, disappearing into the shadows like a dream, leaving me alone in the dark with the sound of the wolves howling in the basement below. The sun of Valkarath felt like a fever dream as I stared into the polished silver of my vanity. Alara was weaving shards of frosted glass and white gold into my hair, her fingers trembling so violently they felt like the skittering of insects against my scalp. You must look like the winter itself, Highness, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the whistling wind rattling the window pane. If they see the sun in you, they will try to extinguish it. She draped a gown of heavy, midnight blue velvet over my shoulders. It was lined with the fur of a snow leopard, the collar standing high and sharp around my throat like a protective ring of bone. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl staring back. My tan was fading into a ghostly pallor, and my eyes, once the bright amber of honey, looked dark and haunted. Let them try, I said, though my stomach was a knot of cold lead. The great hall of the glass citadel was a cavern of nightmares. Massive braziers burned with a strange blue flame that gave off no heat, only a flickering subterranean light. Long stone tables were packed with the nobility of Valtharion, men and women with sharp features and eyes that caught the light like a predator's. The smell was overwhelming. Roasted meat, spilled ale, and the thick, musky scent of wet fur. When I entered, the cacophony died instantly. 100 heads turned. The silence wasn't respectful. It was the silence of a pack deciding whether a new arrival was a guest or a meal. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from a single block of obsidian, sat Keenan. He was dressed in black leather and silver mail, a heavy mantle of wolf skin draped over his broad shoulders. He looked every bit the tyrant my father had feared. But as our eyes met across the frozen expanse of the hall, I saw the flicker of the man I had held in the library. The gold in his gaze flared, then steadied. He stood, his height commanding the room. The Princess Lori of Valkarath, he announced, his voice booming off the ice-slicked walls. The Bride of the Frost. He walked down the dais to meet me. Every step he took was a challenge to the room. When he reached me, he didn't take my hand. He gripped my waist, pulling me flush against his side. The heat of him was a shock through the velvet of my dress, a reminder of the secret we shared, that I was the only thing keeping the beast behind his ribs from shredding everyone in this room. Smile, little son. He hissed under his breath, his lips grazing my temple. Nixon is watching. I looked toward the high table. Commander Nixon sat there, his white hair gleaming like a shroud. He wasn't eating. He was honing a long, jagged dagger with a whetstone, the scrit, scrit, scrit sound cutting through the low murmurs of the court. He looked at me, and his smile didn't reach his flinty eyes. It was the look of a butcher admiring a prime cut of veal. Keenan led me to the seat beside his throne. The feast began, but it was a grim affair. Large platters of raw red venison and dark, fermented root vegetables were passed around. I picked at a piece of bread, my throat too tight to swallow. A toast. Nixon stood suddenly, his voice cutting through the clatter of iron cutlery. He raised a chalice made from a hollowed-out horn. To the king and his trophy. May she last longer than the last one. The room erupted in dark, guttural laughter. My blood ran cold. The last one? I looked at Keenan, but his expression was a mask of stone. Tell us, princess, Nixon continued, stepping toward the dice, his boots crunching on the rushes. How does it feel to know that your brother traded your life for a few more years of sunshine? Does it keep you warm at night, knowing you were worth so little to your own blood? The insult stung worse because it was true. I felt the tears prickling my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these monsters. I felt Keenan's hand close over mine under the table. His grip was crushing, his skin searingly hot. It was a warning and a tether. My brother is a fool, I said, my voice projecting with a strength I didn't know I possessed. I stood up, leaning over the table toward Nixon. But he is a fool who gave me a kingdom of ice to melt. You speak of worth, Commander? I am the daughter of the sun. I have more fire in my veins than this entire fortress has ice. If you want to see what I am worth, come closer. A low growl started in the back of the room. It wasn't human. Nixon's eyes widened, his hand twitching toward his belt. Suddenly, Keenan slammed his fist onto the table. The wood cracked. The blue flames in the braziers leaped toward the ceiling, turning a violent, angry purple. Enough, Keenan roared. He stood, and for a second, his shadow on the wall behind him grew, the head of a wolf silhouetted in the flickering light. The princess is my guest, my ward, my life. If anyone has a grievance with her, they have a grievance with the beast that wears this crown. The silence that followed was absolute. Nixon bowed his head, though the malice in his gaze remained. He backed away, disappearing into the crowd of guards. Keenan turned to me, his chest heaving. His eyes were no longer gold. They were a swirling chaotic white. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh. We're leaving, now. He dragged me out of the hall, through a side door, and into a secluded balcony that overlooked the frozen abyss of the Valtharian valleys. The wind howled here, whipping my hair into a frenzy. You're a fool, he snarled, pinning me against the stone railing. You don't provoke men like Nixon. They don't have a soul to bargain with, Lori. I won't let them mock me. I shouted back, the adrenaline finally breaking through. And I won't let them mock you. You're their king, Keenan? Why do you let them speak to you like that? Because they're right, he yelled, his voice breaking into a howl. He slammed his hand into the stone next to my head, shattering a layer of frost. I am a monster. Every day is a war to keep from tearing this kingdom apart. And you make me want to be a man so badly it's killing me. He grabbed the front of my dress, pulling me toward him. I thought he was going to strike me, or worse, but instead, he crashed his lips against mine. It wasn't a soft kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of salt, cold air, and desperation. It was the kiss of a man drowning, and I was the only air he had ever known. As I kissed him back, my hands tangling in his thick, dark hair, I felt the runes on his skin pulse against me. The heat was unbearable, a white-hot light that seemed to burn through the velvet and the ice. Beneath the balcony, the great frost groaned. A massive crack echoed through the valley, a sound like a mountain breaking in half. He pulled away, gasping, his eyes searching mine. The white was receding, the gold returning, but he looked terrified. Do you see? He whispered, gesturing to the valley below. The curse reacts to you. My heart beats faster, and the ice breaks. If I love you, Lori, I will destroy this kingdom. The eternal winter is the only thing keeping the beast frozen. If you melt the ice in me, you melt the world. I looked out over the dark, jagged horizon. I had come here to save my country from a war. Now I realized the war was inside the man holding me. Then let it melt, I whispered, reaching up to touch the silver scar on his face. I'd rather burn with you than freeze alone in this cage. He looked at me with a hunger that was no longer animal. It was human, and that was far more dangerous. There is a way to lift it, he said, his voice a ghost of a sound. But it requires a ritual older than the stars, and it requires the blood of a sun princess who loves the wolf she's meant to kill. I didn't flinch. Tell me. Not yet, he said, looking toward the shadows where Nixon's spies were undoubtedly lurking. First, we have to survive the night. The moon reaches its peak in 3 days, Lori. And Nixon isn't waiting for the ritual, he's coming for your heart tonight. The kiss had been a flash of fire in a world of frost, but the aftermath was cold and sharp. Keenan didn't stay on the balcony. The moment his breathing leveled, he pushed away, his face hardening back into a mask of jagged stone. He didn't say another word as he escorted me back to my room, his hand heavy and possessive on my arm. He didn't just walk me to the door. He stood there until he heard the heavy iron bolt click into place from the inside. But I knew the bolt wouldn't be enough. I sat on the edge of my bed, the midnight blue velvet of my dress feeling like a lead weight. The citadel was breathing. I could hear it in the rhythmic thumping of the pipes and the low, distant howling that wasn't the wind. It was the sound of the pack. Nixon's words echoed in my mind. The girl from the south is a poison. I must have drifted into a light, fitful sleep, because when the scream ripped through the air, I fell off the bed before I was even awake. It wasn't a human scream. It was a sound of absolute, soul-shredding agony. It came from the direction of the king's chambers. I didn't think. I didn't grab a lantern. I threw on my fur cloak over my nightgown and slid the bolt back. The hallway was a tomb of shadows, but the air was different now. It smelled of ozone and burning hair. I ran toward the north tower. As I rounded the corner, I saw them. 3 of the king's guard, men I had seen in the basement, were standing outside Keenan's heavy oak doors. They weren't guarding him. They were barring the door from the outside with a massive silver chain. "He's turning early," one of them hissed, his voice thick with fear. Nixon said the girl's presence would accelerate it. "The beast is fighting the man, and the man is losing." "Let it lose," another growled, his hand on the hilt of his blade. "Once he's fully turned, he'll kill her, and the treaty will be ashes. Then we march on Valkarath." I felt a surge of white-hot rage. My brother might have sold me, but I was not a pawn to be used to start a massacre. I looked at the heavy bronze vase sitting on a pedestal near the wall. I didn't have a sword, but I had the element of surprise. I grabbed the vase, the metal freezing against my skin, and stepped into the light. "Hey!" I shouted. The guards turned, their pupils narrowing into slits. Before they could react, I swung the vase with every ounce of southern sun in my muscles. It connected with the first guard's temple with a sickening thud. He went down like a felled tree. The other 2 lunged. I dived under the arm of the second guard, my silk slippers sliding on the frost-slicked floor. I didn't wait for them to recover. I grabbed the silver chain they had been trying to wrap around the door handles and pulled. A roar erupted from inside the room, a sound so powerful the wood of the door actually splintered. The force of it knocked the remaining guards back. "Keenan!" I screamed, throwing my weight against the door. The door didn't open. It exploded. I was thrown backward as the heavy oak disintegrated into tooth-sized shards. Through the cloud of splinters and dust, a nightmare emerged. Keenan was no longer a man, but he wasn't yet a wolf. He was a towering, horrific middle ground. His skin was stretched tight over corded, oversized muscles, the amber runes glowing so brightly they left streaks in the air. His jaw was elongated, dripping with silver saliva, and his hands had become massive, black-clawed talons. He looked at the 2 guards trying to scramble to their feet. With a blur of motion, he swept his arm across the hall. The guards didn't even have time to shout before they were slammed into the opposite wall with enough force to crack the masonry. They slumped to the floor, unmoving. Then the beast turned its white, glowing eyes on me. "Keenan," I whispered, backing away until my heels hit the stone railing of the spiral stairs. "It's Lori. Look at me." A low, vibrating growl started in his chest, making the very floorboards tremble. He crouched, his claws digging deep furrows into the black marble. He was going to leap. He was going to tear me apart, and there would be nothing left for the sun to shine on. "Keenan, stop!" I cried out, reaching into my memories of the library. "The silence. Remember the silence." He paused, his head cocked to the side like a confused predator. The white in his eyes flickered, a spark of gold trying to break through the storm. "I am the Sun Princess. I said, stepping forward even as my heart tried to bolt from my chest. "And you are the king of the ice. You told me the beast falls silent when I am near. So listen to me. Listen to the quiet." I reached out and did the most dangerous thing I had ever done. I placed my bare hand on his snout. The heat was blinding. It felt like sticking my hand into a forge. The beast let out a whimpering sound, a high-pitched whine that broke my heart. I didn't pull away. I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around his massive, fur-covered neck, burying my face in the heat of his chest. "I've got you," I whispered. "Don't let the wolf take the man. I won't let you be a monster." The transformation reversed with a sickening sound of snapping bone and shifting muscle. Keenan collapsed, his weight nearly crushing me as he shifted back into his human form. He was naked, covered in a sheen of sweat and blood, gasping for air as if he had just crawled out of a shipwreck. I held him there on the cold floor, my cloak wrapped around both of us. "Lori," he wheezed, his hand shaking as he touched my cheek. His fingers were human again, but his nails were still jagged and sharp. You shouldn't have come. Nixon, he used a lunar salt. He forced the change." "I know," I said, looking at the unconscious guards. "They're coming for us, Keenan. The whole citadel is waking up." He looked toward the stairs, his eyes sharpening. The weakness was leaving him, replaced by a cold, lethal focus. "They won't find us in the light. We have to go down, to the catacombs of the first king." "The basement?" I asked, thinking of the fighting pit. "Lower," he said, pushing himself up. He grabbed a sword from one of the fallen guards, the steel singing as he drew it. "There are tunnels that lead to the heart of the mountain. If we can reach the altar of the moon before Nixon catches us, we might have a chance to break this." "The ritual you mentioned?" He looked at me, his gaze heavy with a secret that made my skin crawl. "The ritual requires a sacrifice, Lori, not of life, but of soul. Are you ready to give up the sun to save a monster?" Before I could answer, a horn blasted from the courtyard below. The hunt had begun. "I gave up the sun the moment I stepped into this kingdom," I said, gripping his hand. "Lead the way." We dived into the shadows of the secret tunnels just as the first of Nixon's men burst into the hallway, their torches casting long, hungry shadows against the weeping walls. The air in the catacombs didn't just feel cold. It felt ancient, heavy with the weight of 1,000 years of stagnant frost. The walls here weren't made of stone, but of black volcanic glass that reflected the glow of the amber runes on Keenan's skin. Every step we took echoed like a heartbeat in a hollow chest. Keenan moved with a predatory silence, his sword held low. He was draped in my golden fur cloak now, a jarring splash of sunlight against the oppressive dark. We had been descending for an hour, weaving through tunnels that narrowed until the ceiling brushed his hair. "Why is it so quiet down here?" I whispered, my voice hitching. "The guards? They aren't following?" "They're afraid," Keenan said without looking back. "The deep tunnels are where the first wolves were born. The air here carries the echoes. They play tricks on the mind. They show you the things you've tried to bury in the snow." As if on cue, the shadows along the glass walls began to shift. I blinked, and for a second, the dark stone turned into the golden vineyards of Valkorath. I could smell the jasmine. I could hear the laughter of my sisters. "Lori, why did you leave us?" The voice was a whisper, soft as a summer breeze, yet it sliced through me like a blade. I stumbled, my hand catching on a jagged edge of the wall. "Don't listen," Keenan growled, his hand snapping back to grip my shoulder. He pulled me forward, his touch grounding me. "The mountain feeds on your regret. Keep your eyes on me." It sounded so real, I gasped, the smell of jasmine fading into the scent of old copper and damp earth. "It's a lie," he said, but his own jaw was tight, his eyes fixed straight ahead. I realized then that he was seeing things too, probably the faces of the people he had broken during his full moon rages. We reached a massive circular chamber where the tunnels converged. In the center sat a pedestal holding a single, frozen scroll. Behind it, a mural was etched into the glass, depicting a sun being swallowed by a massive, silver-white wolf. "The first treaty," Keenan muttered, approaching the pedestal. He didn't pick up the scroll, he simply hovered his hand over it. The ice on the glass began to thin, revealing a script that looked like jagged lightning. I stepped closer, squinting at the ancient text. I had been tutored in the old tongues of the high courts, but this was different. It was a language of contracts and blood. "Keenan," I said, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. "This isn't just a peace treaty. This is a ledger." My eyes scanned the lines, and the world began to tilt. I saw the seal of Valkarath, my father's seal, but next to it was a signature that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't my father's. It was Hartman's. "He didn't just send me here to pay for a mistake," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "He sent me here as a trigger." Keenan turned, his eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" "Read the fine print," I said, my voice trembling. "The treaty says that if the sacrifice of the sun, that's me, is consumed by the beast before the third full moon, the curse doesn't just break, it transfers. The power of the Lycan King passes to the one who orchestrated the death." Keenan's grip on his sword tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Hartman, he didn't want peace. He wanted the wolf. He wanted to use my curse to conquer the southern lands." "He knew you were losing control," I said, the tears finally overflowing. "He sent me here knowing I would be the only thing that could get close enough to you to be killed. He didn't sacrifice me for the country, Keenan. He sacrificed me for a crown of blood." The silence that followed was deafening. Everything I had believed about my life, my duty, my family, my purpose, shattered in that dark, frozen room. I wasn't a princess saving her people. I was a ticking time bomb, sent to die so my brother could become a god of the dark. "So that's why Nixon is working with him," Keenan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low vibration. "Nixon doesn't want me to lead. He wants to clear the way for a king who isn't afraid to use the beast as a weapon." Suddenly, the chamber groaned. From the tunnels behind us, a dozen torches flared into life. Nixon stepped into the light, flanked by his elite guard. He wasn't wearing his armor anymore. He was draped in the ceremonial robes of a high priest, and in his hand, he held a scepter tipped with a shard of the moonstone. "A tragic discovery, isn't it, Princess?" Nixon said, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "To be unloved by your own blood. But don't worry, your death will serve a much higher purpose than Hartman's petty greed." Keenan stepped in front of me, his shadow stretching across the mural of the devouring wolf. "You won't touch her, Nixon. Not while I still breathe." "Then you won't breathe for long, my king," Nixon sneered. He raised the scepter, and the moonstone began to pulse with a sickly, rhythmic light. The runes on Keenan's skin reacted instantly. He let out a choked cry, falling to his knees as the amber light turned a violent, agonizing blue. The transformation began again, but this time it was jagged, forced, and wrong. His bones began to snap and reset with the sound of breaking dry wood. "The moonstone controls the beast," I shouted, reaching for the heavy bronze vase I'd tucked into my cloak earlier, but it was gone. I had nothing but my hands. "Kill the king," Nixon commanded his men. "But leave the girl for the altar. The blood must be fresh when the moon hits the peak." The guards lunged. Keenan, trapped between his human mind and the forced beast form, let out a roar of pure torment. He swung his sword blindly, catching one guard in the chest, but he was too slow. A spear caught him in the shoulder, and he slumped against the pedestal. I looked at the mural, the sun being swallowed by the wolf. "If you melt the ice in me, you melt the world," Keenan had said. I didn't run away. I ran toward the scepter. I didn't have a weapon, but I had the sun in my blood. I dived past the guards, my silk skirts tearing, and grabbed the moonstone with both hands. The pain was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't cold. It was a vacuum, trying to suck the warmth out of my very soul. My palms blistered instantly, the skin turning white-hot. But I didn't let go. I felt the connection, the link between the stone, the curse, and the man screaming on the floor. "Lori, no!" Keenan barked, his voice sounding more like a howl. "It will burn you alive." "Let it," I screamed, focusing every memory of the southern sun, every bit of love I had for the vines and the light, and shoved it into the stone. The moonstone couldn't handle the heat. A hairline fracture appeared in the center of the gem. A blinding flash of gold and silver light exploded through the chamber, knocking everyone to the ground. When the spots cleared from my vision, the scepter was a blackened stick in my charred hands. The guards were scattered, moaning on the floor. Nixon was backing away, his face a mask of terror. And Keenan was standing. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't quite a man. He stood in the center of the light, the blue of the curse and the gold of my warmth swirling around him like a storm. For the first time, the beast and the man were looking through the same eyes. "The echoes," Keenan whispered, looking at Nixon. "They told me I was alone. They were wrong." He turned his gaze toward me, and despite the searing pain in my hands, I felt a surge of triumph. The wolf didn't look hungry, it looked protective. "Now," Keenan growled, his voice a perfect harmony of human and animal, "let's show the commander what happens when you try to cage the sun." The flash from the moonstone had left the chamber in a ringing, crystalline silence. Smoke curved from my blackened palms, the scent of singed silk and burnt ozone filling the air. I couldn't feel my fingers, but I could feel the tether. For the first time, the connection between me and the man standing in the center of the room wasn't a one-way drain. It was a bridge. Keenan didn't wait for Nixon to recover. He moved with a speed that defied the laws of the physical world. Not the frantic lunging of a beast, but the calculated strike of a predator who had finally mastered his shadow. He didn't use his sword, he used the very air. With a sweep of his hand, a wave of pressurized frost slammed into the remaining guards, pinning them against the glass walls. Nixon scrambled backward, his eyes wide as he realized the scepter was dead. This is impossible," Nixon stammered, his back hitting the mural of the devouring wolf. "The moonstone is the only thing that can bind the Lycan spirit. Without it, you should be a mindless animal." "I am no longer bound by your stones, Commander," Keenan said. His voice was a dual-tone resonance that vibrated the very floor. He stepped into the light, and I saw the change. The amber runes on his skin had turned a deep, burning orange, the color of a sunset on the Valkorath horizon. "I am bound by something much hotter." He reached back, his hand finding mine. The moment our skin touched, the searing agony in my palms vanished, replaced by a cool, numbing silver light. He wasn't just healing me, he was sharing the burden. "We have to go," I whispered, leaning into him. "The blast, the whole mountain felt that. Nixon's reinforcements will be at the tunnel mouth in minutes." "They won't be coming through the tunnels," Keenan said, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. Look, high above, the black glass was cracking. The explosion of energy hadn't just shattered the scepter, it had destabilized the heart of the mountain. And outside, the blizzard of the century had arrived. I could hear it now, a roar so loud it sounded like the sky was being torn in half. "The great frost is answering," Keenan said grimly. "Nixon's meddling has pushed the winter into a frenzy. If we don't reach the surface and stabilize the crown, the entire Valtharian Valley will be buried in a single night, including your precious brother's borders." "Then we fight our way up," I said, my voice hardening. We turned to the hidden spiral staircase behind the mural. Nixon made a move for a fallen blade, but Keenan didn't even look at him. He snapped his fingers, and a wall of solid ice encased the commander's legs, anchoring him to the floor. "Stay here and listen to the echoes of the kings you betrayed," Keenan growled. We climbed. The stairs were narrow and slick with condensation. Every few floors, we encountered pockets of Nixon's loyalists. They were no longer fighting a man, they were fighting a force of nature. Keenan moved through them like a scythe through wheat, his movements a blur of silver and orange light. He didn't kill unless he had to. He simply neutralized, his new power allowing him to freeze the very weapons in their hands. As we reached the upper levels of the West Wing, the citadel was in total chaos. Servants were fleeing into the lower kitchens, and the bioluminescent globes were flickering and dying. The cold was absolute. "Lori!" A voice cried out from the shadows. It was Alara. She was huddled in a doorway, holding a bundle of furs and a jagged piece of glass. She looked terrified, but when she saw me, and saw me holding the hand of the half-transformed king, she fell to her knees. "The gates," she wheezed. "Nixon's men have barred the main gates from the outside. They mean to trap everyone inside while the mountain collapses. They've gone mad. They say if they can't have a king who hunts, no one will survive the night." "They're cowards," I said, stepping toward her. "Alara, get everyone to the Great Hall. The pillars there are the strongest. Keenan, can you hold the ceiling?" Keenan looked at the structural beams groaning above us. "I can hold the stone, but I can't stop the cold. Not without the altar." "Then I'll be the fire," I said. We reached the courtyard, and the sheer force of the wind nearly blew me off my feet. It was a whiteout, You couldn't see a foot in front of your face. The snow wasn't falling, it was screaming past us in horizontal sheets. The altar is at the highest peak of the North Tower, Keenan shouted over the gale. But the bridge is gone. It collapsed in the first tremors. I looked across the chasm. The North Tower stood like a lonely sentinel, separated from us by a 50-foot drop into a ravine of jagged ice. The stone bridge that once connected the wings was a heap of rubble at the bottom. "You can jump it," I said, looking at his powerful corded legs. "I can," he said, his gold-white eyes turning to me. "But you can't, and I can't leave you here." "You have to," I argued, grabbing his leather tunic. "If you don't stabilize the curse at the altar, everyone in this castle dies. My life doesn't matter if there's no world left to live in." Keenan grabbed my face in both his hands, his thumbs brushing away the frost forming on my eyelashes. "Your life is the only reason the sun still has a place in this world, Lori. I am not leaving you." He looked at the gap, then back at me. A reckless, beautiful smile broke across his scarred face, the first real smile I had ever seen on him. "Hold your breath, little son," he whispered. Before I could ask why, he scooped me up into his arms. He didn't just run. He let the beast take over his legs. He sprinted toward the edge of the broken bridge, his muscles bunching like coiled springs. We hit the edge and soared. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. We were suspended in the eye of the storm, hanging over the abyss. The wind tried to tear me from his grip, but his arms were like iron bands. I looked up and saw the moon, a massive, bloated silver coin breaking through the clouds. We slammed into the opposite ledge. Keenan tumbled, tucking his body to protect mine, and we slid across the ice-slicked stone until we hit the base of the altar. He groaned, coughing up a spray of crimson that froze instantly on the snow. "Keenan!" I scrambled to him, checking his pulse. He was breathing, but the jump and the constant shifting were taking their toll. The orange glow on his skin was fading, replaced by a deathly, translucent blue. "The altar," he wheezed, pointing to the stone table above us. "Touch it. Use the blood from your hands. The burn, it's the key." I looked at my palms. The blisters had popped during the climb, leaving raw, red skin that hummed with a strange internal heat. I climbed the steps to the altar. It was a slab of pure white marble, etched with the same devouring wolf mural. I placed my hands on the stone. The reaction was instantaneous. The altar didn't just glow, it ignited. A pillar of golden light shot straight up into the sky, piercing through the heart of the blizzard. But as the light grew, I felt my strength draining. It was like a straw had been stuck into my soul, drinking the warmth that kept my heart beating. My vision began to blur. The edges of the world turned gray. "Lori, stop!" Keenan shouted, struggling to his feet. "It's taking too much. You're giving it everything." "I have to." I gasped, my knees hitting the snow. "The ice, it's stopping." Indeed, the wind was dying. The screaming roar was fading into a gentle hum. The great frost was receding, the clouds parting to reveal a sky filled with a million indifferent stars. But the cost was my life. I felt the cold finally winning, creeping up my legs, turning my blood to slush. I slumped against the altar, my eyes closing. "Lori, no." I felt his arms wrap around me. He pulled me into his lap, his heat trying to fight off the encroaching dark. He was crying, real, human tears that fell onto my cheeks and felt like boiling water. "Don't you dare," he sobbed, his voice breaking. "I just found you. I just learned how to be a man again. You can't leave me with the wolf." "Keenan," I whispered, my voice a ghost. "The sun always sets." "Not tonight," he growled. He didn't bite me. He didn't use a ritual. He simply pressed his forehead to mine and gave something back. I felt a surge of silver energy, the essence of the wolf, the strength of the mountain, pour into me. It wasn't warm, but it was alive. It was a wild, fierce spark that refused to let my heart stop. My eyes snapped open. The world was no longer gray. It was filled with colors I had never seen before. I could hear the heartbeat of the mountain. I could feel the roots of the trees miles away. I looked at Keenan. The runes on his skin were gone. The gold in his eyes was steady and soft. He looked human, entirely human. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice strong again. "I shared it," he whispered, exhausted. "The curse, the gift, whatever it is. It's not just mine anymore. It's ours." We sat there on the roof of the world, bathed in the dying glow of the altar. The blizzard was over. The kingdom of Valtharion was still frozen, but the air felt different. It felt like the beginning of a thaw. But our peace was short-lived. From the courtyard below, we heard the sound of marching boots and the clatter of golden armor. "The Valkarath Vanguard," I said, recognizing the heraldic horns. "Hartman is here. He's come to claim his prize." Keenan stood up, offering me his hand. He wasn't a wolf, and I wasn't just a princess. We were something new, something the world wasn't ready for. "Let him come," Keenan said, his hand tightening on mine. He wanted a monster. Let's show him what happens when the sun and the moon finally meet. The heavy, rhythmic thumping of the Valkarath drums echoed up the North Tower, a sound that used to mean safety but now felt like the ticking of a countdown. Hartman was here. My brother, the man who had wrapped me in silk and sent me to a slaughterhouse, had come to survey the wreckage. I stood beside Keenan on the edge of the altar. Below us, the courtyard of the glass citadel was no longer a tomb of white. The golden armor of the Valkarath Vanguard shimmered like spilled coins against the snow. There were hundreds of them, their spears leveled at the survivors of the citadel who had huddled in the great hall. "He expects to find a corpse and a mindless beast," I said, my voice carrying a new, resonant edge. The silver spark Keenan had shared with me was humming in my veins, making the sub-zero air feel like a cool spring breeze. "He is going to find a reckoning," Keenan replied. He looked down at his hands, human hands, steady and strong. The runes were gone from his skin, but the power was still there, coiled like a spring in his soul. We didn't take the stairs, we took the shadows. We descended through the citadel, moving like ghosts through the secret passages Alara had shown me. We emerged into the great hall just as the massive iron doors were kicked open. Hartman stepped inside, his golden cloak sweeping the floor. He looked magnificent, untarnished by the frost, his face set in a mask of practiced grief. "Keenan Paul," Hartman's voice rang out, dripping with false authority. "Show yourself. I have come to reclaim the remains of my sister, and to put an end to the terror of the Valtharian wolf." Nixon was there too. He had somehow dragged himself from the lower tunnels, his legs still limping from Keenan's ice. He stood by Hartman's side, a hungry look in his eyes. "The beast is in the tower, Prince Hartman," Nixon wheezed. "It has consumed the princess. The blood is ready for the transfer." I stepped out from behind a pillar, the midnight blue velvet of my dress torn and stained with soot, but my head held higher than Hartman had ever seen it. "The blood is quite settled where it is, brother," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Hartman froze, his hand halfway to the hilt of his ceremonial sword. His eyes widened, scanning me for wounds, for the expected signs of a struggle. When he saw I was whole, and that my eyes were glowing with a faint silver-white light, his face went pale. "Lori?" he whispered, his voice cracking. You're alive?" "You sound disappointed," I said, stepping into the center of the hall. Keenan stepped out from the shadows behind me, his presence filling the room like a sudden storm. Hartman's gaze shifted to Keenan. He looked for the monster, but he only found a king, a man who looked more dangerous in his human form than any beast Hartman had ever imagined. "The treaty is void, Hartman," Keenan growled. "You conspired with a traitor to murder your sister and steal a curse you couldn't possibly hope to control." "Lies," Hartman shouted, gesturing to his guards. "The girl is possessed. The beast has warped her mind. Kill them both. Save the princess from her misery." The Valkarath guards hesitated. They knew me. They had seen me grow up in the sun-drenched gardens of the south. But Hartman's command was law. They began to move, their spears lowered. "Stop," I commanded. It wasn't just a word. It was a pulse of energy that rippled through the hall. The air in front of the guards suddenly froze into a wall of solid crystal, 5 feet thick. They slammed into it, their spears shattering against the ice. Hartman stumbled back, his eyes darting to Nixon. "You said the stone controlled the power. You said." "The stone is gone," I said, walking toward him. "You set me here as a sacrifice, Hartman. You thought I was the coin to pay your debt, but you forgot one thing about the sun. It doesn't just provide light, it burns." I reached out my hand. I didn't touch him, but the air around Hartman began to shimmer with heat. The gold thread in his cloak began to smoke. He let out a yelp of terror, tripping over his own feet as he fell onto the cold marble floor. "You would kill your own brother?" he gasped, his dignity replaced by the raw cowardice of a trapped animal. No, I said, looking down at him with a pity that hurt more than anger. I am going to send you back to Valkorath. You will tell our father the truth. You will tell him that Valtharion is no longer a kingdom of prisoners. It is a kingdom of equals. Keenan stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Nixon. The commander tried to run, but the shadows of the pillars seemed to reach out and grab his ankles, holding him fast. And as for the traitors within these walls, Keenan said, his voice dropping to that terrifying dual tone, the mountain has a long memory. You will spend the rest of your days in the deep tunnels, listening to the echoes of the kings you tried to betray. The Valkorath guards lowered their weapons. They saw the power we held, the union of the sun's fire and the moon's strength. They saw that the forgotten princess had become something they could no longer command. Take him, I said, gesturing to Hartman. Take him out of my sight. As the guards dragged my sobbing brother toward the gates, the people of the citadel began to emerge from the shadows. Alara, the servants, even the soldiers who had been loyal to Keenan but afraid of the beast. They looked at us with a mixture of awe and fear. Keenan turned to me. The orange and silver light was still swirling in his gaze, but his touch was soft as he reached for my hand. You saved them, he said. We saved them, I corrected. But Hartman won't be the last. The world will hear that the ice is melting. They will come for the power we have. Let them come, Keenan said, pulling me closer. The cold of the citadel was gone, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from the very stone. The sun and the moon finally have a home, and I'm not letting anyone blow out our light. Outside, the first rays of dawn began to break over the jagged peaks of Valtharion. For the first time in 1,000 years, the light didn't just hit the ice. It began to sink in. The great thaw had begun, and I was no longer the princess of a distant sun. I was the queen of the eternal frost, and the man beside me was finally, truly, free. The victory over Hartman had brought a temporary peace, but the silence that followed the thaw was uneasy. As the weeks passed, the kingdom of Valtharion transformed. The suffocating, unnatural permafrost had retreated, revealing ancient stone paths and soil that hadn't seen the sky in centuries. But as the ice melted, it unearthed secrets that should have remained buried. I stood on the balcony of the North Tower, watching the horizon. For the first time, the transition from night to day didn't feel like a battle. The silver moon dipped behind the peaks just as a pale, peach-colored sun climbed over the jagged edge of the world. My hands were healed, the skin now marked with faint, shimmering silver traceries that looked like frost caught in amber. They pulsed whenever Keenan was near. The messengers from the south returned today, Keenan said, stepping out onto the balcony. He looked different now, clean-shaven, his dark hair pulled back, wearing a tunic of charcoal wool instead of the heavy, blood-stained furs of a monster. He looked like a king who had finally found sleep. And, I asked, turning to him, did my father receive the scroll? Keenan's expression darkened. He did. But Hartman reached the capital first. He has told the High Court that you didn't just survive. He claims you've been corrupted. He's calling you the Witch of the Frost and me the Devourer. He is building a coalition, Lori. He's telling the neighboring kingdoms that our union is an abomination that will bring an eternal eclipse. I let out a bitter laugh. He was always better at weaving lies than I was at weaving silk. He knows that if we are seen as monsters, the world will feel justified in coming for our power. It's already starting, Keenan said, moving to the railing. He pointed toward the eastern coastline, where the frozen sea was beginning to break into massive floating bergs. 3 ships were spotted at the mouth of the Serpent's Bay this morning. They weren't flying the gold of Valkorath. I squinted, my new sight sharpening the distance. The ships were black-sailed, their hulls carved from a wood so dark it looked like charred bone. The Shadow Isles, I whispered, the necromancers of Malkor. They've smelled the change, Keenan growled, his voice carrying that low, dual-tone vibration that reminded me the wolf was still there, just balanced. The Shadow Isles have thrived in the dark for centuries. They relied on the Great Frost to keep the mainland weak and divided. A unified Valtharion is a threat to their trade of souls. Before I could respond, the balcony floor shuddered. It wasn't a tremor of the mountain this time. It was a rhythmic, thumping sound coming from the base of the tower. It sounded like thousands of wet hands slapping against the stone. "Lori, get back," Keenan commanded, his hand moving to the hilt of his new blade, a sword forged from the silver of the moonstone and the gold of my family's treasury. I looked over the edge. My heart skipped a beat. Climbing the sheer walls of the citadel weren't men or wolves. They were pale, spindly creatures with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with a sickly violet light. They moved with a sickening, liquid grace, defying gravity as they scrambled up the black glass. "The drowned ones," I gasped. "The Shadow Isles infantry. They don't breathe, Keenan. You can't freeze their lungs if they don't have any." "Then I'll freeze their blood," he snapped. He stepped to the edge and slammed his palm against the railing. A wave of frost erupted from his hand, cascading down the side of the tower like a frozen waterfall. The creatures it hit were encased instantly, shattering into 1,000 icy shards as they fell to the ravine below. But for every 10 that fell, 20 more appeared. They were coming from the melting sea, drawn to the citadel like moths to a flame. "They aren't here for the throne," I realized, the silver traceries on my hands beginning to burn with a fierce, protective heat. "They're here for the altar. They want to use the bridge we created to anchor a new kind of darkness." "We need to get to the courtyard," Keenan said, grabbing my hand. "The people, they're trapped in the lower halls again." We raced down the spiral stairs, but the citadel was already under siege. The drowned ones were bursting through the windows, their violet eyes searching for warmth to extinguish. I didn't have a sword, but I didn't need one. As a creature of the Shadow Isles lunged at me, its cold, clammy hands reaching for my throat, I didn't flinch. I reached out and touched its chest. A burst of pure, concentrated sunlight exploded from my palm. The creature didn't just die. It evaporated, its dark essence hissed away into steam. "Stay close," Keenan shouted, clearing a path with sweeps of his frost-covered blade. We reached the great hall, which was filled with a thick, violet mist. In the center of the room stood a figure draped in tattered black silk. He held a staff topped with a skull that was weeping black ichor. "King Keenan," the figure rasped, the sound like dry leaves skittering on a grave. "And the Sun Princess. You have caused quite a stir in the deep places of the world." "Lord Vane," Keenan spat, his eyes turning a lethal, swirling gold. "You're a long way from your boneyard." "I am here to collect a debt," Vane said, gesturing to the mist. "The ice was a prison, yes, but it was also a seal. By melting it, you have opened the gates to the underworld. My masters would like to thank you by taking your souls as payment for the inconvenience." Vane raised his staff, and the violet mist began to coalesce into the shapes of the people Keenan had killed while under the curse. The ghosts of fallen soldiers, their eyes hollow and accusing, began to circle us. "Look at them, Keenan," Vane sneered. "The weight of your sins. Do you think a little sunlight can wash away the blood on your hands?" Keenan faltered. The gold in his eyes flickered, the old guilt rising up like a tide. The ghosts pressed closer, their cold whispers filling his head. I could feel his hand trembling in mine. "Keenan, don't listen," I cried, trying to push back the mist with my light, but the darkness was heavy, fed by his own regret. "That isn't you anymore. You saved this kingdom." "He is a beast," Vane laughed, "and you, princess, are just a spark that will soon be snuffed out." One of the ghosts, a young boy Keenan had accidentally struck years ago, reached out a spectral hand. Keenan dropped his sword, his knees hitting the floor. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." "No." I stepped in front of him, facing the mist. I didn't try to fight the ghosts. I tried to see them. I reached into the silver spark Keenan had given me, the part of him that was animal, pure and instinctual. Animals don't feel guilt. They feel survival. They feel love. They feel the sun. I grabbed the spectral boy's hand. Instead of pulling away, I poured my warmth into him. "You aren't a sin," I whispered to the ghost. "You are a memory, and memories deserve to be at peace." The ghost didn't attack. It paused, the violet light in its eyes turning a soft, warm amber. It looked at me, then at Keenan, and slowly faded into a shower of golden sparks. One by one, I touched the apparitions, turning their pain into peace, using my light to bridge the gap between their world and ours. Vane's eyes widened. "What are you doing? You're wasting your life force. You'll be empty." "I am the sun," I said, my voice echoing with the power of the mountain. and the sun never runs out of light for those in the dark. As the last ghost vanished, the violet mist cleared. Keenan looked up, the gold in his eyes returning, brighter and steadier than ever before. He stood up, his hand finding his sword. He didn't look like a man burdened by the past. He looked like a man ready to defend the future. "My turn," Keenan said. He lunged at Vayne, but he didn't use the wolf's rage. He used the king's precision. With one swift strike, he shattered Vayne's staff. The skull exploded, and the dark ichor turned to steam as the ambient heat of the room, my heat, hit it. Vayne let out a shriek of agony as he began to dissolve. "This is not over. The Shadow Isles do not forget. The eclipse is coming." Then he was gone, leaving nothing but a pile of tattered silk and the smell of ozone. The remaining drowned ones, sensing their master's defeat, fled back into the melting sea. The great hall went quiet, the only sound the heavy breathing of the survivors who had watched the whole battle. Keenan turned to me, his face pale, but his eyes filled with a fierce, burning pride. He walked over and gathered me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could hear his heart thudding in his chest. "You saved my soul again, Laurie," he whispered. "I'm getting tired of doing it," I joked, though my voice was weak. The effort had drained me, the silver traceries on my hands were dim. We looked out the shattered windows of the hall. The black-sailed ships were retreating into the mist, but the threat wasn't gone. We had fended off the dead, but the living, Hartman and his coalition, were still coming. "We can't stay here and wait for them to pick us apart," I said. "I know," Keenan agreed. "If they want to call us the king and queen of the eclipse, then it's time we showed them what a real shadow looks like." "What are you saying?" Keenan looked toward the south, toward the golden fields of Valkorath. "We aren't going to wait for the war to come to us, Laurie. We're going to take the winter to them." The march to the south was not a conquest, it was a phenomenon. As we crossed the border of Valtharion, the air didn't just grow cold, it became balanced. Where Keenan stepped, the frost laid a path of silver glass. Where I walked, the flowers bloomed in the middle of the snow. We were an army of two leading a legion of the redeemed, and the world watched in a terrified hush. The golden walls of the Valkorath capital loomed against the horizon, shimmering under a sun that felt aggressive, as if it were trying to burn away the infection of our arrival. Hartman had prepared. Thousands of archers lined the ramparts, their arrows tipped with dragonfire, and the heavy gates were reinforced with blessed steel. "He's terrified," Keenan said, sitting astride a massive white charger. He no longer looked like the prisoner I had met in the ice. He looked like a god of the tundra, his silver mail reflecting the morning light. "I can smell the sweat of 10,000 men from here." "He should be," I said, my voice low. I wasn't on a horse. I stood on the ground, my bare feet sinking into the soil. I could feel the heartbeat of the world, the ley lines of heat and cold swirling beneath the crust. "He took a sister and tried to make a martyr. He's about to find out that martyrs don't stay buried." The trumpets of Valkorath blasted, a shrill, desperate sound. "Laurie of Valkorath!" Hartman's voice was amplified by a sorcerer's stone, echoing from the highest battlement. "Halt your march, you bring a monster to our gates. You bring the winter to the land of eternal light. Turn back, or I will be forced to strike you down for the safety of our people." I stepped forward, leaving the ranks of our Valtharion guards behind. I walked until I was within bowshot of the wall. 1,000 arrows were notched and aimed at my heart. "Hartman!" I shouted, and the silver spark in my lungs made my voice roll like thunder. "Open the gates! I have not come to burn this city. I have come to take what was never yours." "Fire!" Hartman screamed. A wall of flame descended from the sky. Thousands of fire-tipped arrows arched upward, a rain of death meant to incinerate me where I stood. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I reached out both hands and called to the mountain I had left behind. Keenan let out a primal roar, and the ground beneath me erupted. A massive wall of ice, thick and translucent as diamond, shot out of the earth, curving over me like a protective wing. The arrows hit the ice and hissed into steam, their fire extinguished by the absolute zero of the Valtharion frost. Through the steam, Keenan charged. He didn't need a ram. He slammed into the gates with the force of a falling star, his hands glowing with a blinding amber light. The blessed steel didn't just break, it shattered. We entered the city not as invaders, but as an inevitable tide. The people of Valkorath, my people, shrunk back into their homes, but they didn't see a monster. They saw me, the forgotten princess, walking calmly through the center of the storm, the ice at my heels and the sun in my eyes. We reached the palace gardens, the place where I had played as a child. Hartman was there, backed against the great fountain, his golden sword trembling in his hand. He was surrounded by his elite guard, but they were backing away, their eyes wide as they looked at Keenan. You're a curse, Hartman shrieked, his face contorted with a madness, born of fear. You're supposed to be a wolf. Why won't you just turn and kill her so I can have the power? Because the power was never in the blood, Hartman, Keenan said, stepping toward him. He didn't draw his sword. He didn't need to. The power was in the surrender. Hartman lunged, a desperate, clumsy strike aimed at Keenan's throat. Keenan didn't move, but I did. I stepped between them, catching the blade with my bare hand. The steel glowed white-hot where I touched it, then turned brittle as ice, shattering into a dozen pieces that fell into the grass. "It's over, brother," I said. I placed a hand on his chest over his racing heart. "The sun is setting on your reign." I didn't kill him. I did something worse for a man like Hartman. I took away his heat. Not enough to kill him, but enough that he would never feel the warmth of the sun again. He collapsed, shivering, his skin turning a permanent, ghostly pale. He would live out his days in the very shadows he had tried to weaponize. The crown of Valkorath rolled across the grass, stopping at my feet. I looked at it, then at the people watching from the balconies. I looked at Keenan, who was waiting for my command. "I don't want a crown of gold," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the capital. "And I don't want a throne of ice. The era of kingdoms separated by walls is over." I reached out and took Keenan's hand. As our fingers locked, a massive pulse of energy, half gold, half silver, rippled outward from the palace. It swept across the city, across the borders, and into the heart of the Valtharian mountains. The great thaw and the great heat met in the middle. The jagged ice softened into fertile rivers. The scorching deserts of the south felt the cooling kiss of a northern breeze. "We are the eclipse," I whispered to the world. Keenan pulled me into his arms, his forehead resting against mine. The beast was silent, the man was whole, and the princess was finally, truly, herself. "Is it done?" he asked. "No," I said, looking out at the new world we had created, a world where the sun and the moon could finally share the same sky. "It's just beginning." I leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that tasted of pine and jasmine, of frost and fire. Beneath us, the earth hummed in a perfect, beautiful harmony. The curse was gone. The heart of Valtharion was no longer ice, it was us.